The sunlight streamed gently through the tall arched windows of the grand ballroom, filling the luxurious space with a warm golden glow that danced across the glittering chandeliers and polished marble floors. The tables, perfectly arranged and draped in crisp white linens, were adorned with crystal vases overflowing with roses, their sweet fragrance mingling with the hum of conversation that swirled through the room. It was one of those carefully orchestrated charity luncheons where the city's wealthiest gathered, not simply to donate, but to be seen, to gossip, and to reinforce their status with every calculated smile and graceful gesture. The air carried a sense of effortless elegance for those seated at the tables, but for the young waitress weaving her way silently between them, the atmosphere was far from enchanting. Emily, dressed neatly in a white shirt and black apron, her dark hair pulled tightly back, moved quietly from guest to guest, balancing a tray in her trembling hands. Her eyes, tired yet alert, scanned the room as she served dish after dish, blending into the background like she had been trained to. To the glittering guests, she was invisible, little more than a shadow ensuring their experience remained perfect. But for Emily, every second of this job mattered. It was the fragile thread keeping her life and her brother's life from unraveling entirely. Once, she had dreamed of finishing college and building a future free of endless shifts and overdue bills. But life had proven unforgiving. Her mother had passed when she was only 16, leaving her to raise her younger brother, Luke, after their father had abandoned them years earlier. Overnight, Emily had been forced to shoulder the dual burden of provider and protector, roles that demanded more than her youth should have allowed. For 5 long years she had done whatever work she could find, cleaning houses, washing dishes, waitressing at late-night diners, anything that would keep food on the table. And the electricity running. Now, this hotel job, exhausting as it was, gave her just enough to cover rent in the small apartment she and Luke called home. Despite the heaviness pressing down on her every day, Emily never complained. She swallowed her weariness and smiled when required, though beneath that smile lived a constant weight, far heavier than the trays she carried through the echoing halls. On this particular day, however, everything seemed determined to unravel. The night before, she had barely slept as she sat at Luke's bedside, cooling his fevered forehead with a damp cloth and whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed herself. By morning, her body ached with exhaustion, her head clouded and heavy. Yet she showed up to work, forcing her movements to remain steady, her smile intact, her pace brisk enough to avoid drawing attention. She did what she always did, tried her best to remain invisible, blending seamlessly into the grandeur around her. But fate seemed unwilling to let her pass unnoticed. The more she tried to shrink into the background, the more the spotlight seemed to chase her. And then it happened, the moment that would change everything. Emily had just set a delicate plate of salad before a woman wrapped in pearls when her foot caught on the corner of the thick carpet. In an instant, the tray she carried tilted, and before she could catch herself, a glass of water slipped from her grasp, tumbling down in slow motion. It spilled across the pristine white tablecloth in a shimmering wave, soaking into the fabric and spreading toward the expensive silverware. The sound was small, but the reaction was anything but. Gasps rose from around the table, sharp and collective, slicing through the music and the chatter. The woman seated before her, Margaret Whitmore, a socialite known for her diamonds as much as her cruelty, jerked up from her chair as though she had been personally insulted. Her perfectly manicured fingers shot out, pointing directly at Emily. And her voice, shrill and cutting, filled the ballroom, drowning out all else. "How dare you!" she shouted, her words slicing through the room like a blade. In an instant, every eye turned toward Emily, who stood frozen, the tray trembling still in her hands, the weight of judgment pressing down on her harder than ever before. "You clumsy, worthless girl! Do you even know where you are? You don't belong here." Margaret Whitmore's voice cut through the air like a whip, each word sharper than the diamonds strung across her neck. The humiliation seared Emily's skin as though she had been struck. Her face flushed red, and the sting of 100 eyes on her burned worse than fire. From every table, whispers began to ripple, hissing through the room like venom. Emily lowered her gaze and stammered apology after apology, her voice trembling so badly she could hardly form the words. But Margaret was not finished. With deliberate dramatics, she plucked a linen napkin from the table and dabbed at her dress as if Emily had spilled something far more poisonous than water. Her lips curled, her tone dripping with disdain. "You're fired," she spat, her voice echoing across the gilded ballroom. "Right here, right now. Get out before you ruin anything else." The reaction was immediate. The chatter that had once filled the hall shifted into a storm of murmurs, some guests chuckling at Emily's expense, others shaking their heads with smug disapproval. The grand room, moments ago alive with warmth and laughter, now felt suffocating. Emily's world spun, her pulse racing in her ears as the truth of it struck her. Fired, in front of all these people. She couldn't breathe. Her fingers clutched the tray tightly against her chest, as though it were a shield that could hold her together. Tears welled at the corners of her eyes, threatening to fall, but she swallowed them back with every ounce of strength she could muster. She had promised herself long ago, and she had promised Luke, that no matter how hard life became, she would not break, not in front of others. Yet standing there, the weight of judgment pressing down from every direction, her strength faltered. She felt her composure slipping, her dignity trembling on the edge of collapse. As Emily turned to leave, her hand shaking against the tray, something unexpected caught the light. A small glimmer, faint but unmistakable, slipped free from beneath her apron. The silver pendant she always wore dangled into view, swinging gently with her movements. It was simple and worn from years of use, but its compass-shaped design was unique, etched with delicate markings her mother once told her symbolized finding your way home. Emily had never parted with it, not once. It was the only piece of her mother she had left, a fragile tether to a past that had been torn away too soon. Normally, she tucked it safely beneath her uniform, hidden from sight, but now under the unforgiving glow of the ballroom chandeliers, it gleamed for the first time in the presence of these strangers. At a nearby table, a man who had been quietly watching the chaos suddenly froze. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that seemed to command authority without effort, he exuded a presence that silenced the room without uttering a word. His name was William Harrington, one of the city's most influential billionaires, a man whose decisions could sway markets, and whose reputation carried more weight than the people whispering around him. Emily, lost in her own storm of humiliation, had no idea who he was. But William's eyes were no longer on the spectacle or the crowd. They were locked on the pendant resting against Emily's chest. His expression shifted, his carefully composed mask of indifference slipping into something raw, first curiosity, then disbelief. Memories rushed at him, unbidden and unstoppable. That pendant. He had seen it before. He had once held it in his hand, years ago, when he had given it as a gift to the only woman he had ever truly loved. Anna. The name struck his heart like a bell. Anna, the woman who had vanished from his life decades earlier, leaving him with an emptiness that neither wealth nor power had ever been able to fill. That pendant had been their symbol, of love, of hope, of a future they had dreamed of together. And now, impossibly, it hung around the neck of a young waitress who bore such a striking resemblance to Anna that William felt as though time itself had collapsed, folding the past into the present. His heart thundered in his chest, the world around him blurring into insignificance. The ballroom moved on, the guests returning to their chatter and laughter, dismissing Emily as nothing more than a forgettable mishap in their perfect afternoon. But William couldn't move, couldn't look away. Something greater than coincidence was at play. He rose abruptly from his seat, the scrape of his chair against the polished marble floor slicing through the noise and drawing heads once more toward the scene. Margaret smirked triumphantly, certain he was about to join her in publicly dressing down the poor girl. But to her surprise, William crossed the room with deliberate steps and came to a halt in front of Emily. The crowd hushed again, curiosity rippling through them as they watched the billionaire fix his piercing gaze on the trembling waitress. His voice, calm yet weighted with an emotion few had ever heard from him, broke the silence. "Where did you get that pendant?" he asked, his words low but carrying enough force to still the entire hall. Emily blinked in confusion, her tears still shimmering at the corners of her eyes. The room seemed to blur around her, voices and faces fading into a distant haze as the tall man before her spoke with such gravity. She clutched the pendant instinctively, her fingers curling around it as though it might shield her from the storm of attention. "It was my mother's," she whispered, her voice so soft it was nearly lost beneath the weight of the moment. "She passed it down to me." For the first time that afternoon, the sound that rose from the tables was not cruel laughter or disdainful whispers. It was shock. A collective gasp rippled through the glittering crowd as if some unseen truth had just shifted the very ground they stood on. William's face paled, his carefully composed exterior unraveling as his suspicions were confirmed with a force that nearly brought him to his knees. His voice trembled as he asked, "What was your mother's name?" The question seemed strange to Emily, and hesitation caught her tongue. She didn't understand why this powerful stranger cared, but the intensity in his eyes demanded honesty. "Anna," she finally said, her voice catching as she spoke the name she had carried in her heart all her life. "Anna Carter." The effect was immediate. William's hands shook, his breath unsteady, as though lightning had cleaved straight through his chest. That name, spoken aloud in this place, tore open memories he had buried for decades. Anna, the woman he had loved with every fiber of his being, the woman fate had stolen from him too soon. And now, standing before him, was her daughter. This fragile, trembling waitress was not a nameless servant in the eyes of the wealthy. She was family. She was the living echo of the love he had once lost, and with that realization came a wave of fierce protectiveness unlike anything he had ever felt before. From that moment, Emily's life shifted as though destiny itself had stepped into the ballroom. William Harrington, billionaire, philanthropist, and a man accustomed to commanding respect with a glance, turned his gaze away from Emily and directly toward Margaret Whitmore. The room held its breath, the weight of his authority descending like thunder. Margaret straightened in her chair, certain she would be praised for her cruelty, but the words that fell from William's lips silenced the entire hall. He did not scold Emily, he defended her. In front of the stunned guests he declared that no one, no matter their wealth or status, had the right to treat another human being with such venom. His voice rang out with a force that shattered the shallow laughter and withered the smug smiles. And then, with calm finality, he demanded that Emily be reinstated immediately, not as an act of charity, but as an act of justice. For Emily, who had spent years fading into the background of life, the moment was overwhelming. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone had stood for her. She was no longer invisible, no longer the shadow drifting through grand rooms where she did not belong. She was seen. And not just by anyone, by someone who spoke her mother's name with reverence, by someone who had known the woman she had loved and lost so dearly. That night, though she returned to her small apartment weary and dazed, Emily carried something with her she had not felt in years: hope. In the days that followed, William sought her out. What began as curiosity deepened into understanding as he listened to Emily's story, the endless sacrifices she had made for Luke, the years she had worked tirelessly to keep their fragile world intact, the dreams she had shelved away in order to survive. He did not pity her, he respected her. And because of the love he had once held for Anna, and the admiration he now felt for Emily, he refused to let her fight alone any longer. He arranged for Luke to receive proper medical care, ensuring his fever and frail health were no longer dangers she had to face alone. He helped secure their apartment, lifting the constant fear of losing the little they had. And more than anything, he urged Emily to return to her dreams, to finish her education, to build the life she had once believed was out of reach. For Emily, it felt as though the world had tilted into a new orbit. The kindness she received was unlike anything she had expected or dared to imagine. All her life, the compass pendant had been a reminder of loss, a relic of the mother she could never get back. But now, it became something more. It became a key, a beacon that had guided her through the storm to this moment of unexpected grace. What once symbolized the pain of what she had lost now symbolized the hope of what she could become. And one bright afternoon, as Emily walked through the city streets hand in hand with Luke, the sunlight spilling golden across their path, she felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. She felt peace. Her brother's laughter rang out, free of sickness, and she realized that sometimes life takes everything away not to leave you broken, but to prepare you, to empty your hands so they are ready to hold something greater. The pendant at her chest gleamed softly, a reminder that even in loss, there can be new beginnings.